Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Rappaport Center for Law and Public Policy. My name is Patricia McCoy, and I am the faculty director of the center. We are here today for the last event in the 3-day visit of Danielle Surred, who is to my left, our Rappaport Center Senior Fellow. For her final event, Danielle has organized today's panel discussion titled Disruption. You may ask, what is disruption? I think our panel members will have varying views of disruption, but my understanding at least is that disruption means working outside the system and often questioning the system to effectuate change. It could be creating new approaches like restorative justice that works better than putting offenders in prison. It could be organizing workers or tenants for collective bargaining. It could be mobilizing demonstrations against unjust practices. We can think of it as grassroots action. As law students and as lawyers, most of our training is about working within the legal system, especially within courts, legislatures, and agencies. But there are many other ways to seek change. Sometimes they are more effective than relying on the system alone. Sometimes they are the only thing that works. Conservatives and progressives alike can and do work outside the system using disruption. And sometimes disruption transcends the political. Allow me to read this quote from a recent article in The Atlantic magazine. Dissidence emerges in environments where power, usually government power, tramples on the basic conditions of life as people know and value them. We recognize what this means in Minneapolis. People do not like to see their neighbors terrified and rounded up. They do not like to see masked men with guns acting with impunity. They do not like their children being too afraid to go to school. The reaction of regular people in Minneapolis is not fundamentally about an ideological or policy disagreement with the administration. The movement that has arisen on the city's frigid streets is about defending what any reasonable American would call normal, the expectation of a life without the threat of violence and coercion. Our panel today is highly timely and will explore what it means for lawyers and non-lawyers alike to seek change outside the legal system. This panel will be recorded. So, let me introduce our Rappaport Senior Fellow, Danielle Surred, who was the inspiration for this panel. Danielle is one of the nation's leading thinkers in how to reduce criminal violence while also reducing incarceration and racial injustice. She is the founder and director of the organization Common Justice, which advances solutions to violence. Danielle has devoted her life to fighting for alternatives to prison that better serve survivors while reducing violent offenses and the racial injustice connected with incarceration. Danielle received her BA from Emory University and her master's degrees from New York University and Oxford University, where she studied as a Rhodes Scholar. She is the author of this outstanding book, Until We Reckon, Violence, Mass Incarceration, and a Road to Repair, and I highly commend her book to you. Danielle, let me now turn today's event over to you. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you to the people on Zoom. Thank you. Oh, I'm almost never asking about it. Thank you to the people on Zoom who I think can only hear tonight. Enormous thanks, Amanda, as always, for this incredible welcome. Amanda will introduce ourselves, but also just noting we expected Noble Williams with us here today, and he's had an emergency, but is very much with us in spirit. Lucky for you, he is local to Boston, so you should be able to find another opportunity to hear him speak, and if you do, you should take it every time I have him, I learn. I'll share a little bit about why we're talking about disruption, and then pass it to Amanda, who will moderate these lovely folks tonight through the conversation. And really for me, I'm like, we are in a moment of enormous transformation in this country. I was talking to someone the other day said we are living in revolutionary times. It is just not the revolution we hoped for. And it is a time that requires of us far more than any of us have lived in. And it requires not only that we do more, but that we think differently, that we really understand the mechanics of power. We understand how institutions exercise power. We understand how people exercise power. We understand the things that underlie all that power, the assumptions and the stories and the narratives that drive culture and hold things in place or break them apart. And that we find in ourselves, but more than that with each other, the courage to take the kinds of actions that can not only kind of return us to some, in theory for some people, preferable status quo, but instead propel us forward into an actual multiracial democracy for the first time in our history. And so with that, I'll pass it over to the extraordinary Amanda Teo to take us through today's conversation.
Thank you, Danielle. We're really grateful for all of you for being here today. I had, on Danielle's prompting, invited an all-star panel, and we are truly, truly lucky to have Jessica and JJ here with you today. Rather than having me introduce them, I'd like for them to say a few words about themselves and explain a little bit about what you do at your organization, and maybe in this context also tell us a little bit about what disruption might mean for your organization at this time, and how do you see yourself intervening to change, impact, or radically transform things as they are. So it's a two-parter, and here at BCLL, we don't give easy questions. So introduce yourself first, and then take a crack at the questions. Great. JJ, you want to start?
Sure. Thank you all so much for taking time to be with us today. My name is JJ Straight. I use she, her pronouns. I am the National Campaigns Director for Reproductive Freedom at the National American Civil Liberties Union. Most folks know it as the ACLU. We are a legal organization. I am not a lawyer. I have not enjoyed the law school experience that all of you are enjoying. I'm an organizer, and so my background is primarily in organizing both in reproductive rights movements, and as my counterpart is doing, I also worked in the labor world for about 12 years, organizing workers, both organizing them to join the union, organizing them to go on strike, and to fight for a better world, and I did a lot of politics at the union as well. I've been with the ACLU for 4 years, so I started right before we got the Dobbs decision leak in April, and then we got the Dobbs decision in June, and have been working diligently with our 54 state affiliates to think about how we not get used to the world as it is, where we have a state-by-state patchwork of healthcare options on reproductive health, but get back to a place where this is a fundamental right, as we believe it is, for anyone to be able to access the healthcare that they wish to access, regardless of their zip code, their circumstances in terms of socioeconomics or any other barrier. And so I wake up all day, every day, sort of thinking about how to do that in a moment where, frankly, our opposition is using the law quite successfully to continue to whittle back rights. I was just on a call before I came here talking about the fact that we have 2 cases moving where folks are attacking mifepristone, which is an abortion medication that millions of patients have used since it was made available in the United States and across the world. So I also have the pleasure of working as a national campaigns director, and so I think about disruption all the time. I do work at a legal organization. How do we think of it? You might see stuff from us that says things like, see you in court, and we will see folks in court. We have filed over 200 cases against the Trump administration since last January. And fundamentally, those are both to protect and uphold the rule of law. But we also really see it as, in this moment, a way as interruption as disruption. Really slowing things down, making people take pause, looking at how the law has fundamentally been about making our individual rights go forward and not backward. And so while we know that not every case will be a winning case, although many of them are, we also know that this is an important part of disruption in this moment. And my job is to complement that legal disruption that we do at the ACLU by really informing and pulling people in to take different activist roles in this moment as well. Compelling folks, we do a lot right now on what we call Know Your Rights, which is really making sure that people fundamentally understand that even though we have law agencies that are acting lawlessly, we have rights in this country. They are in the Constitution, and it is our job to continue to undergird that and make sure that people really fundamentally understand that, as well as making sure that we give people tactical ways. We've been doing trainings recently. I hope that you see them or join one if you're so compelled, on how to make sure that we are also filming under our legal ability to do so and capturing this moment when we see law agencies acting lawlessly. So I think about the ways that we pull people in based on where they are on their values or their want to really defend these individual rights and freedoms, which we know people really care about, and complement them to our legal strategy. I will turn it to my awesome friend, Jessica.
Thanks, JJ. So, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jessica Tang, and really I'm just like a middle school teacher. I taught in Boston public schools. I taught civics, actually, humanities and social studies. But then I got more involved in my union, which is the Boston Teachers Union, and so I kind of worked my way up a bit. So I was a building rep, and then I was on the executive board, and then I was the founding organizing director, and then I served as the president of the Boston Teachers Union for 7 years before now taking on my role at AFT Massachusetts. AFT is the American Federation of Teachers, and we represent over, I think it's 1.8 million now, people across the nation, actually international, it's an international union. It's mostly educators, but also higher ed, healthcare, and public services. And in Massachusetts, I represent 25,000 educators, pre-K through higher ed, but then also, again, we also represent AAUP and MLSA, which is the Massachusetts Staff Library Association, so the librarians as well. And so, you know, in terms of the work we're doing for around the theme of disruption, I would, I guess, say that labor unions kind of disruption is in our just DNA. It's kind of just like what we do in order to fight for workers' rights and to fight for justice and social economic justice, but also a lot of our unions have explicitly committed to racial justice, also climate justice as well. And the other role I'll say that I have taken on is I'm also vice president of AFT in our international union, and our president, Randy Weingarten, really saw what was happening pretty early on. She actually just wrote a book called Why Fascists Fear Teachers, and how it's really about, yes, it's about fascism and authoritarianism, but it's really about how public education is foundational to democracy, and how attacks on public education actually are a direct attack on on democracy itself too. And so early on last year, actually, she had asked me to chair a new committee called the Resistance Committee. Didn't really know at that time what I would be doing or what I was getting myself into. But I've had to take a really deep dive into understanding authoritarianism and what we can do as unionists and in the labor movement to fight back. And so for me, I learned some statistics from, we have a lot of mutual friends here. And you know, there's a group of them, Hardy Merriman and Danielle Hunter, Navy Block, Kea Chatterjee from Free DC, who early on, again, saw what was already happening. A lot of these folks like Danielle and Hardy actually normally are helping other people in democracies around the globe in helping to fight back against democratic backsliding and to also advance democracy globally. And so they very early on saw the signs of what was happening in the United States in terms of backsliding. And they gave this presentation, I think in February of last year, which honestly kind of freaked me out, but it was good because it lit a fire under my butt to like really do more and to do everything in my power. But some of the statistics they shared, right, were pretty sobering. So they basically were like, yeah, the political scientists have, discovered that found that in the last 30 years, if a country starts to backslide in their democracy, you have like a 52% or 53% chance of being able to recover your democracy. And I was like, that's like a 50-50, that's like a coin toss, right? And then they're like, yeah, and if there's no civil resistance movement at all, it's actually like 17% chance that you'll be able to get your democracy back. But the most compelling statistic to me was that they said, but if trade unions, labor unions, are involved in the civil resistance fight back, then that chance of reclaiming your democracy and making it stronger and better is 83%. And so when I heard that, I was kind of like, am I allowed to say for like, well, I was like, oh, please.
We're up around here, it's okay.
Okay.
Saying that the whole
Okay, all right.
No one's addressed it.
Okay. All right. Well, I was just going to say, oh, shit. Because I realized the responsibility that labor was going to have to play if we were going to be able to fight for a better democracy. And so, I'm going to go back to the original question about disruption and the role of labor unions. And I say better democracy because I want to name that our democracy was not working for everybody in first place already. So the goal is not to go back to the status quo. We wouldn't have gotten here if our democracy was working and everyone actually did have a voice and, like we didn't have the need for the civil rights movement and, civil rights election rules and laws and things that are all being rolled back, which is a problem too. And so, the basic premise is we have to, in order to stop the harms that are happening, we have to slow them down. And this is where I think nonviolent civil disobedience, non-cooperation, and the role of lawyers in the legal realm is really important because we have to slow things down before we can stop it. And then it is going to take us many years. I remember waking up early last spring at some point and being really sad because I realized, I'm going to, for the rest of my life, be fighting to reverse the harms that have already happened so quickly. And so, and I kind of had that realization. I was like, okay, and I've embraced it now, that I will spend the rest of my life fighting to get back the rights and undo the harms that we've seen over the last couple of years. But again, I want to say this extends beyond even just the last year. So of course it's been accelerated, but there were bad things happening for a very long time. And if anything, I think we got a little too complacent with the state of things. And so I just want to name that, right? The abuse of power by federal agents or by state agents or authorities is not a new phenomenon. It's just been escalated at a point where, it's harder to ignore. And so I'll go back to the original question, though, around disruption. Disruption takes many forms for us. And so whether it is filing lawsuits, again, proud that AFT and AFT Massachusetts was part of the first lawsuit to sue the Department of Education over the dismantling of the Department of Education, but also in little classroom level ways too, right? So when books were banned, DEI, or teachers were told to take down posters that said everyone is welcome here, there have been, small acts of disruption too. And those small acts of non-compliance are really important to this moment as well. Because if we don't do anything, then the abuse of power can continue. And for an educator, I think we talk, in our classrooms and schools about bullies and how to stop bullies and stop bullying of our children all the time, right? And you have to stand up to bullies. Otherwise, they will always ask for or demand more. And so that is, I think, the importance of the disruption and the non-compliance and why Tim Snyder who wrote on tyranny, said, like, one of the cardinal rules is you do not obey in advance. And unfortunately, we've seen too many pillars already, whether it was law firms, I'm not going to name names, but I think we know who they are, but also corporations and even higher education institutions comply in advance. And one thing we know from the organizing world, right, is that our strength is in solidarity. And so if it's hard for just one person to say no, but if we're organizing ourselves and all agreeing, this is why those higher ed compacts were so important, is that we will stand together and say, no, we are not going to do this. And again, that goes, I think, back to the labor rules. That's the whole point of, like, unions, right, is that when you're a part of a union, you're part of a collective, and your response is collective, and it's about that solidarity that gives us power, because ultimately there are more workers than, say, like a boss, right, who's treating you badly. I think you can then take that analogy to what's happening also in the United States with our government right now.
Jessica, you've given us so much to think about, but I want us to maybe shift from, a lot of our mindsets around grassroots organizing can sometimes be around, as we said, interruption, right, or the dismantling of things that are not going well, taking down things. And I think one of my questions that I have for all three of you, maybe starting with Danielle, is, can you help us think about how your organization, or in this moment, how you're thinking about shifting this strategy that you're using, or whatever strategies you're using, one that temporarily interrupts the regular operations of things, or, small acts, and then how do we take that and make it become something that meaningfully generates or makes room for real sustainable transformation? What would that look like, and how do we connect the small acts of resistance to an alternative vision of what things could be? Danielle, it's a big question. Can I invite you to start?
Sure. So I think about this question of, right, it's about both the scale and the durability of change. And for us, I think about it in a few ways. I think about a dimension that's about practice, which is that in my organization, we divert serious violent felonies into restorative justice. That is supposed to be impossible practically, politically, otherwise, and it's fully possible and it works, and we demonstrate that by doing it. And there are 1,000 ways that what we do is we just do something that is not supposed to be done, whether that's because it's not allowed or not believed in, or it seems too hard or too wild or too radical. Like, we do things in practice. And those practices can happen in any institutions, they can happen in nonprofits, they can happen in families, in neighborhoods, like among communities, right, where people start to behave differently, and in doing that, demonstrate to one another what's possible. I think the second dimension we think about is around narrative and culture. Like, I think one of the things we see in the sort of slippage of the rule of law is that the rule of law isn't more than culture, right? That if those agreements aren't fully held, like, laws are agreements we make with each other, right? Like, if those agreements aren't held by the broader culture, they're not worth any more than the paper or email they're written on, right? Like, it doesn't, those things have to do with culture, they have to do with narrative. And so we think a lot around narratives about violence in this country. The stories about violence are as old and as racist as this nation. And they involve all these stories about violent people from whom we have to be protected at any cost. And talk about obeying in advance, right? Like, we will yield our morality, our pragmatism, our relationships in order to invite the state to protect us in ways we know are going to be brutal, because we've been told these people, whoever they are so dangerous to us that we have to capture them and inflict pain at whatever cost, financial and otherwise. That's a story, right? It runs totally contrary to people's lived experience of people who commit violence. Even the people who commit the worst violence, for example, are most of the time not committing violence, right? Like, are doing plenty of other things in full, loving lives. And so some of these narrative questions are a story that is about an imagined monstrous other, which in this country is entwined with anti-Blackness and increasingly now with nativism. right, undergirds so much of what we do. And so it's why the moment Alex Pretty is killed, they're like, he's a violent assassin. And everyone is waiting to find out if that's true, to know how mad to be, right? And then people are like, oh, he was a nurse, well then this is terrible. Like, the truth is, we shouldn't be, state agents shouldn't murder people on the street, period, in my view. I don't think that's the goal of the state, is to murder people on the street. I think we made a list of appropriate roles that wouldn't be on mine. And the way we wait to determine our level of outreach, the level of response, until we have information about some way someone matches up with whatever moral purity we've determined, is incredibly dangerous. And we talked about this on Tuesday, but very entwined with operations of the criminal legal system. And so we think a lot about narrative change work. Narrative is like, it's TV, it's TikTok, it's relationship, right? It's like what happens at Thanksgiving or what doesn't happen. All the things you say here that you don't say when you go home, say them when you go home. Like, save our democracy, save them at home. You know, like, you can't leave anyone behind. If you are in relationship with someone who is supportive of what is happening, talk to them. Like, move them, pull them towards you. Like, we can't afford to let anyone go. We can't let each other go, the people who are most vulnerable, most endangered in this time. We have to, like, link hands and refuse to be separated in this time. But that also calls on people who are in relationship with people with power and people who are supporting this to do the uncomfortable thing in those relationships, because if not us, then who? Like, no one of the black people in my life has ever asked me to unfriend a white person. They're like, go get your cousins, right? So we have to hold close our neighbors and go get our cousins at the same time. And some of that is about coming to this narrative. It's the cultural piece about who we believe is dangerous, who we believe should do the protecting, and how. And those stories have undergirded the rise of every fascist regime. Globally, historically, there is always a story about someone from whom we need to be protected, and that enables the exertion of this otherwise intolerable power. And so those stories, we have to contest them every time they come up. And then I think, and then culture is durable, right? Like, culture moves, but it has a strength to it that no law we pass ever will. And then the last piece of it that is like what I think all of us share most in common is that you just have to build power. Like, you just have to organize. None of us do anything well alone. We can do anything together. You can win incredible legislative campaigns and lose them the next year if you didn't organize, because you got the legislators and you got ads and you did a great FOIA request, you had a great lobbyist, like, you perfect comms, nail it, get the bill. The next year it's gone because you didn't build power, because you didn't engage the people to whom that law matters in the fight to win it, and therefore the fight to keep it. And so every single place that we do anything like organizing, anything like base building, we have to do more and more and more. We have to talk to everyone who agrees with us and mobilize them to action. Everyone who is already taking action has to take more courageous action. People who are not acting have to act. People who disagree with us have to be moved toward us. We have to talk to our neighbors we don't like. We have to move everybody into increasing collective power. And it's the only thing that will hold it in place, right? It's the only thing that will hold the democracy in place. And in theory, democracy is a structure of collectivized power, right? Like at its best. That is not democracy as we know it. And so the day of, like, the mayoral election in New York City, for example, my baby woke up and said, "Mama, today's the day we learn whether organized people can beat organized money," right? And the reality is, not only is our opposition better organizing money, our opposition has better organized people. And we have failed to take seriously the sites of hyper-local civic engagement, school boards, library boards, community boards, all these places where people come together and actually influence power. And people who like democracy have been largely absent from these local democratic sites. Like, I joke, we're doing all this new civic engagement work at community boards in New York City, and I joke, if I wanted to hide out from the left, I could every day go to a different community board and no one would find me. Like, I would need not go underground, I could just go there, because we're not engaged in those spaces. And we have to go to all of those spaces, and it doesn't matter if the meetings is boring. We have to sit through the meetings and build power with one another. And I think when we do that, like when we practice things that are supposed to be impossible, when we change the stories and culture about who we are and who we are to each other, and then we build durable power, I think you might get at least a few years of your life where you don't have to rebuild this shit, where you can just relax in a democracy. Like, I think it is ours too.
What do you think, Jessica?
Well, I also have learned about myself that I don't know how to relax. Oh, thank you. What I've learned about myself is I don't know how to relax, so I'd probably be fighting for something. Even if I could and should relax sometimes, probably. But no, I do think it's possible. Like, you know, another statistic that I learned about is from Erica Chenoweth's work. She's a political scientist over at Harvard and studies social movements and when are social movements successful. And so how many of you have heard of like the 3.5%? A couple people, okay. So for those who haven't heard that statistics, it's essentially if you can at least get 3.5% of the population to be participate in sustained, it's not just like a one-time thing, but sustained non-cooperation or a sustained actions and as a part of a larger movement, then you can make actual real change and like win that campaign, right? So 3.5% of the population actually is around like 11 million or 10 million people. And I think we are getting close to that. And unfortunately, it did take people losing their lives in this moment, I think, to get more people to join. You know, I think we look at this as the organizing perspective, like there's a spectrum of allies, right? You've got your people who are totally against you, and then you've got people who are kind of against you, you've got your neutral people, then you've got people who are with you, as you're saying, and then the people who are like already taking action. And you know, I have to say too, I'm not going to assume that everybody in this room like agrees with the idea even that we're facing an authoritarian threat. Reality is, I have some members who don't actually, despite the fact that we literally have educators and students who have been detained. And I appreciate your comments earlier, right? Because sometimes it's like, well, were they criminals, or you know, were they documented, or were they undocumented? And I don't think that's the point. I think the point is we have due process and a rule of law, and that's what's being actually ignored, right? And so, especially as attorneys and lawyers, and even in the labor movement, that's something I can talk to with my members, right? Because generally we understand this idea of due process, because if you're on the job and you get accused of something, then you want to make, our job is to make sure that you have due process, right? And you know, I will say, I think that framing is problematic, but for some folks, you know, who are like, oh, well, you know, if the argument of just rule of law doesn't move you, then I think that we do have to point out it is not just people who are undocumented, or you know, this idea of going after criminals. That's actually just not what's happening, right? And so we were actually, I was in Minneapolis on the 23rd. And we met with our affiliates there, which is Minneapolis Federation of Educators and also St. Paul Federation of Teachers. It's not just actually Minneapolis where the violations of the Constitution and unlawful things are happening. It's across Minnesota. We were in Education, Minnesota, where people are literally being racially profiled. And so there was, a teacher who was just going to work, driving into her school parking lot, got hit by an ICE officer, and this is all recorded, and then they tried to say that she was obstructing them, but they have it on video. She was just trying to turn into her parking lot, and they broke her car window and dragged her out of the car and detained her. And they released her 2 days later because they had nothing on her, and the only explanation they could think of is that she kind of looked like she could have been Latina. And so racial profiling is happening. I mean, the Supreme Court has said it's okay. And so we, I think, really have to reach people who may have different viewpoints, and again, my own membership have different viewpoints on immigration, but what can we agree on? And if we believe in the Constitution and rule of law and due process, can we agree that if those things are being violated, if court orders are being violated? I was stunned when I read the decision on this little boy, Liam. So here's another example, the 5-year-old boy who's a citizen who got detained with his father. And when they were released, the decision from the justice was, it was pretty searing.
Yeah.
And then I believe it was in this decision they said also that there was like 96 other instances where the court orders were just being ignored by the federal government. And so when that happens, then what? Who's going to speak up? Who's going to stop it? If the federal authorities themselves are not ignoring the court orders from our own federal government and our justice system, then who's going to stand up and stop it? If it's not the usual, checks and balances if it's not working. And the only answer is the people, right? Which is, again, why we have to speak up and take action.
Wow, I am ready to leave and go out in the street, y'all. So I'll just say, in the reproductive rights movement, we have amazing partners in a movement called Reproductive Justice. And reproductive justice has been really rooted in the idea that this isn't just about one single, aspect of being able to access abortion or not being able to access abortion. But it really is about your whole lived experience, about whether you want to parent, how you want to parent, and the safety of your children, right? And so I think about that a lot in this moment, and I think about something, actually, Danielle, that you said as we were coming together to talk about this panel, which is some of this is, for me at the ACLU, I have also been part of the same collective that Jessica was, and like I said, I am not a lawyer. The fact of the matter is, I had very little access. I didn't graduate from college either. I went right into organizing. So very unusual person to be working at the ACLU. But what I was taught through was something called popular education. And so in this moment, standing on the shoulders of amazing giants like my colleagues in reproductive justice, and also as we were at this convening of freedom trainers, we're calling ourselves, popular education is really the notion that outside of higher education, adults have so much to teach each other in general practice, whether that is a skill or this type of thing like organizing. And you said something about the really most compelling thing about Minneapolis is people are going outside. They are not staying inside. They are going outside on their blocks and doing vigils. They are going outside and helping their neighbors. And I think that what I have seen from the reproductive justice movement, and frankly now across this country with this patchwork of laws that we have around whether or not you can access basic health care that you need, is a lot of mutual aid. Mutual aid is one of the most scary things that folks can come together and do. First, we're confirming what we're feeling. We are all confirming, and I think I had the same revelations that you did, Jessica, in that training of oh, this is happening. What I think is happening is happening. We are all experiencing this, and we are seeing something is not right here. And then from that, we are learning information about what can we do about it? What do we know from our own history? What do we know about from global movements? What do we know about from trade labor? What do we know about from popular education? About how you pull people in and you really confirm their experience. You confirm that this is scary, that we are seeing, a lot of things that make us want to stay inside, myself included, but that we need to go outside. And that also, we may need to provide support to one another that isn't being provided in the general ways that we've seen, right? And so I've been thinking about that a lot in my own movement, because after jobs, when we saw this patchwork, right away, abortion funds, which were immediately villainized and continue to be, and other systems of mutual aid stepped into the gap to make sure that people got this access to health care no matter what, because that is what the end goal is. The end goal isn't to right-size the law, although obviously we want to do that, and that's what we should shoot for. But to get there, we need to continue to normalize that this is an everyday experience that people have in seeking healthcare, and how are we going to help them get that healthcare immediately so that we can get to the policy correction or the very many corrections we're going to need to make from this moment that, yes, may take quite a bit of our lifetimes, and then get to that better democracy. And I think about that every day. I've been training ACLU members and supporters across the country all summer, and just did a training a couple weeks ago in Connecticut. And people are confirming in that room what they're seeing, confirming that we do have a structure of agreements that we believe in the Constitution and the rule of law and the Fourth Amendment and the First Amendment and things that we are seeing being violated, and that the only way that we can continue to push back on that is to come together and make that demand. And some of making that demand is by doing, like you said, right? Like, I keep hearing and worrying myself about the election, but I just keep thinking like, yeah, but I'm going to vote. I'm going to expect that my vote is counted, and I'm going to expect that that counted vote goes towards the person that I expect to see in office, right? And so not pre-complying and not voting, right? Which is like a couple of people have already said to me, well, it's not worth it, I'm just not going to vote. Okay, that is a choice, but that is a pre-compliance choice. When we can send, elections don't fix everything, certainly, but they are a collective moment in this country where we send clear messages about what we want and what we don't. And so I've been thinking a lot about that mutual aid in my own work at the ACLU, how we can train people and how we can get empower them in the moment about these things like our constitutional rights that were maybe taken for granted a little bit, and now we need to kind of put our feet on the ground and create stakes and make sure that we're demanding them. And also what it's going to take both in law and in other what we call pillars that really hold up society, civil societies, to continue to push back on what our expectations are in this country, what our expectations of our democracy are, which certainly isn't, for me, that one person, regardless of whether they're Joseph Robinette Biden or Donald J. Trump, has the ability to take away abortion from every single person in this country, which is how it stands now. That is not acceptable. That's something that we need to change. And the ways that we want to change it are continuing to make those demands of what our expectations are. So.
Thanks, JJ. So what I've heard from both what you and Jessica both said is that in many ways the way we are trying to make this change more durable is not by doing something new, but rather to be sort of doubling down on what more movements have already done well. Which leads me to think about, like, how are we thinking about this moment generally? Like, are we thinking about this moment as a moment of rupture where something is extraordinary? Or is it just, as Jessica was saying, sort of a heightened or a more visible manifestation of something that's been going on for a very, very long time? So I'm going to turn to Danielle to dig a little bit deeper on this. Right now we're all very concerned, as we should be, probably about ICE and about federal law enforcement and its engagements with state and local law enforcement and the people. But how does this moment of reaction to ICE sort of, is not exceptional, right? But rather just an extension of this sort of familiar logic that your work at Common Justice has been sort of dealing with for a really long time. And how might we use this moment to sort of accelerate our understanding of what is needed to respond to the state of policing in this nation more generally?
So I think if you don't listen to Ajaris Dixon's The Fascism Barometer podcast, you should. Ajaris Dixon, Fascism Barometer, genius. And she's been thinking about fascism since long before it was cool. And she said this thing in one of the episodes where she just said, slavery was fascist. Jim Crow was fascist. And I had not thought about those in that way before, but there are times, you have times where people say something to you and you immediately understand it's true. It's like you didn't know it before, and then the moment they tell it to you, you're like, now I know this thing deep in my bones. And it was one of those for me. And I think, what she means is, like, if fascism includes you don't have standing relative to your government, there aren't limits as to what your government can do to you. Your government doesn't regard you as fully human. There's nothing in your power you can do to exercise authority over that. You don't get to decide who governs you. You don't get the same rights as people around you. Your things can be taken, your children can be taken, your life can be taken, right? If this is what fascism is, that has been the experience of Black people in America in varying degrees since 1619, right? And so that also means that when we're looking for responses to fascism, we don't just have to be like, what did they do about Weimar Germany? Though we should do that. But we can be like, what do they do in Mississippi? right? Like, we look to the Underground Railroad, we look to the Civil Rights Movement, we look to everything that was happening in the 40s and 50s before anybody sat on anybody's bus and refused to get up, right? We looked at the years of political education and training, decades of work that was happening in multiracial formations that were fully against the law to bring about something else. And so we have a lot of really close examples of defeating fascism. So I don't think fascism is new to American soil. I do not think we have had a fascist federal government. So I think for the federal government to be taken over by fascists is new, is an absolute rupture. So we can understand things as not having come from nowhere, right? Like, I mean, even an asteroid wouldn't be brand new because we've had those here before, you know, like the dinosaurs always talk about it. But like, it can still, we can have, and still understand this as a moment of enormous escalation, right? And of the concentration and consolidation of power in a way that is unprecedented in our lifetimes. And I think this moment of people's, I think, awakening around ISIS behavior is both extremely frustrating and extremely energizing. And to pause to decide which order to say those adjectives in. So it is frustrating because Black people in America in particular will tell you that those videos look very familiar. Those behaviors are very familiar. That you start talking to your kids at age 4 and 5 about the fact that might happen, and you're lucky if you make it to 4 or 5, because that means that no one in your family has been hurt by the police in a way you had to tell your child, that you haven't had an encounter with the police in front of your own baby until then. Like, if you make it to 5, you're like, okay, thank goodness, because at least now they've got language for it, I can explain it, right? This is, policing in America looks like that for Black Americans and for other marginalized Americans. And it always has, right? And so if that is intolerable, we have to ask ourselves then, is that intolerable to us because we don't think somebody, any person, should be treated that way? Or is it intolerable to us because we thought the agreement was that good white people wouldn't be shot in the face, and that agreement has been breached, right? And that's a different stance, because if the problem is the second thing, then all we're doing is we're like, whoa, you guys, we have to go back to the agreement where it's not us, right? It's not a minivan mom. It's not a VA ICU. I mean, maybe it's an ICU nurse at an urban hospital. Maybe it's a Black ICU nurse, but it's not a white male ICU nurse at the VA with a gun permit. Like, that's too far, right? And so what we are challenged then is to say, like, there is something about that norm being breached that's very significant, right? Is very significant and is an enormous message to white people in America about what we can and can't do. Like, the message is like, oh, you think you're exempt? You think you're free? You think bad things happen to other people and you can opt in or opt out, right? Like, you all can decide. You're gonna have law degrees. Do you work in the interest of equity, or do you work to build equity? You know, like, what are you doing for yourselves, right? Like, we're supposed to have agency around it. There's a message in that is like, if you are in solidarity with people of color, you should expect to face the same conditions that people of color face all the time, right? That, like, your privileges as a white person, I mean privilege the way you have, like, privileges to enter a building. It's like your little, they'll turn off your little swipe card, your little, like, key fob dunzo, if you align yourself with Black and brown people in this moment. That message is really important, and whether or not we heed it is extraordinarily important. Black and brown people have been fighting to keep this democracy democratic and free forever. Like, I have no standing or opinion to tell Black people what the hell to do with America. You know, like, let me be clear. But, like, as white folks, we have a question of, like, is the request that we revert back to things as we recently knew them? Or are we now able to look at this and say, feel the part of us that's moved by it, and say, like, we should have always been moved by this? And not spend too long being like, oh, don't call your Black friends and be like, I'm so sorry, I should have always been moved by this. Like, you know, like, please, and definitely don't do that in my name at least, but to have a moment. But do tell your white cousins that, the previously aforementioned white cousins. Like, talk to them. And to be like, this thing that in my bones I am afraid of now, that is unconscionable, that I know to be wrong. And I can also see now that this has always been true. And whatever we do going forward, it can't be true ever again. Like, keep the whistles, y'all. Like, when ICE is gone, there will still be police who will do the same thing. Like, we don't surround police cars and blow our whistles and come find our neighbor. Not everybody, but there's a huge tradition of cop watch in this neighborhood on which ICE watch has been built, right? Like, there's, in this nation, like, there's a huge, and in my neighborhood, it's like a major origin story in Brooklyn. But anyway, like, there's just, we have history in this. And so I think there's an important thing in us saying, like, how do we understand this in relationship to the past? How do we see what is actually happening? Like what you said when you're like, shit, this is happening, right? When you're like, I don't want this to be what's true. This is terrible news. But saying it isn't what makes it true, right? It's already true. So if it's already true, we should look at it. And then to say, like, what are we fighting to go back, or are we fighting to go forward differently? And can we, like, refuse to ever be whatever it is we just were that landed us here? Because in many ways, if we think about what is responsible for this moment, some is our failure to do hyper-local civic engagement, like to really organize and build durable power, to over-rely on law and policy to the exclusion of organizing and power building. And the other is our level of tolerance for cruelty and inhumanity and murder known to us, in front of us, to our neighbors. And if we can decide that we're not going to do, and none of those are about what any political party is doing or what any particular president is doing, like those are about how we have and how they decided to be with one another. And the decisions we make about how we decide to be with one another, I think, are going to be much more consequential than any particular litigation, than any particular protest. But it's a question of whether we can reorient to what it actually means to be in a democracy, which is not that we vote occasionally, but that we belong to each other.
Thanks, Danielle. That was so moving that I think a lot of us are ready to march out of here right now. But
it makes me say one last thing, which is no movement has ever won without students, y'all.
That's right.
In this country, no movement has succeeded without students, y'all. I am so busy. Do you know how busy I am? I run this whole organization. I try to stop fascism. Like, we have a lot going on. Like, we are very busy people. Like, I'll speak for myself. I am here with you because we have never won anything without you. And so this is not about what other people should do somewhere else, like, to be really clear. There is not a version where we win and students aren't activated as part of it. So now I'm done.
Thank you. Well, on that note, I think one of the most important parts of a panel is to actually allow our students to engage with our panelists. And I'm speaking slowly so that our students can begin to think about a question, but I'm going to pose one to the panelists so that our students can start to think. You know, we are here in a law school. We are here among students who have made great sacrifices, financial, personal, and otherwise, to commit themselves to the rule of law, to upholding the rule of law. We also understand that, you know, we are not just lawyers to be, but we are also human. So a lot of things that you talked about in terms of mutual aid, organizing, et cetera, are things that we can be doing, regardless of our institutional roles or our disciplinary training. But yet, we are here as lawyers and law students, and we have a ton of practitioners on the Zoom as well. I'm curious from your points of view, and whoever wants to jump in to take this, please feel free. You know, what is the role of law in either supporting or sustaining disruption? Is there a role for law? And how should we think about intervening or maybe stepping back as people who are engaged in the law? Who wants to take this one?
I mean, I certainly hope there's a role, since I work at an organization that's dedicated its mission over the last 100 years to use the law to advance individual civil rights and civil liberties. and has done so, you know, in ebbs and flows, and was even created around the Palmer raids, another moment in our country where we faced fascism. That is the birth of the ACLU, was around that moment. And so we definitely see a role, and some of it I'll just have to say, I am not a lawyer, as I said, I am married to a lawyer, and I tell him all the time, sometimes, and just the ACLU, like sometimes the credibility of that brings something to the room, right? Like when folks know that I am sitting on, you know, a panel talking about know your rights, and I can train that material, I know how to train that material, but when they know that it's coming from lawyers who have spent their, you know, career looking at how important the law is to hold together those norms and agreements that we make to one another, there's something to that, to being, we often are observers as the ACLU in certain moments where that is our role, is to make sure, just like all of us now are observing and documenting, that being able to take that and then marry it to the law and use it effectively in court or in policy. I spend no time in court, although I do support our teams who do litigation and they're brilliant at it. But we spend a lot of time on the policy end of it too, you know, really thinking about how we advance things and how we reject things in policy that aren't serving of us. And I think that when we look at the ways that we're going to have to undo this, and that culture hopefully can lead, culture, politics is downstream of culture. So how do we make sure, though, that that downstream, that those policies that then we can hold together reflect that. So yes, I believe there's a role. And I'll just say, Jessica and I also learned about, you know, in Poland, in their recent, you know, work, like the judiciary hung together and walked out. So lawyers and judges aren't activists typically, but that was a red line. And when I think of the pictures of that and just that moment of them noticing that, like, they were the line that they had to hold on the law and what that meant symbolically in their robes as they were doing it. That decision that came down, that you said, those things matter and get out and help us form this. So absolutely, everyone has a role.
Could we open it up to student questions now?
Yeah, absolutely. I wonder if, Jessica, do you want to take that before we open it up?
Well, I'm happy to take the question. I do have a couple comments, but you should ask your question because I could probably work it in.
Please go ahead, because my question is actually for directors.
Okay, sure. So yes, there's absolutely a role. I can think of so many roles. I mean, I get to be a lawyer without the degree because I negotiate contracts and for a living as a labor, leader, right? But what I've learned also in that role is that oftentimes people want other people not to be able to understand the legal language and not to know their rights and not to understand what power they actually do have. And so lawyers have a really important role of understanding the language and translating it for other people so that they, in simple terms, know what their rights are and know what they can do and breaking it down, because otherwise, again, if you don't know, then you don't know, right? And so lawyers, I think, have a really important role to play just in that way, just like, the know your rights, for example, like the difference between a judicial warrant and administrative warrant and things like that, and like actually you do have the right to just like record, safely from a distance, all that kind of stuff. But also, the lawsuits matter. They are slowing things down so that we can continue to do the organizing work we need to do in order to get to that 3.5%. And so organizations like Democracy Forward have they have absolutely made a difference. Every lawsuit that's filed, every legal decision that's written, and that decision, by the way, was a Republican appointed judge. So, for the folks who think this is just partisan, it's not. There are just so many roles. And then the mutual aid piece, I mean, we don't have enough lawyers right now for all of the immigrants right now who are, being taken out of the state. Yep. They're trying to move people out of the state within 6 to 8 hours so that they don't have time to get a habeas petition filed. And so I just think of so many roles, and then one last thing is just students really do matter. I mean, the reason I'm here is because I really wanted students to know you have power. Every social movement, when students lead, it is more successful. And so there's a new group called Educational Freedom Project, which was started by some Northeastern students. They're working with students across campuses, and so happy to connect any students to that group as well. But yeah.
Thank you. All right, so starting with students, who has questions for our panelists?
Oh, okay.
Hi, everyone. First, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate your time. And I missed the introduction, so I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, but Director Sarita. I appreciated a lot of what you said about fascism and its rise and its prominence throughout American history. And I agree with a lot of what you said, except for one part, and I'm very curious to hear your thoughts, is that you said that this is the first time that fascism is in our federal government. You also described many instances of fascism and systemic racism in our country, slavery, Jim Crow, and whatnot. However, I feel like the federal government, throughout American history, on multiple occasions, protected those very fascist systems. So would you say that maybe this is more of a revival than a...
Yeah, so I mean, the first time in our lifetime, that's fair. Yeah, so absolutely. And I think, and fascism, I think it's a really welcome pushback. Fascism is not like an on-off switch, right? Like you can be like a little fascist, and I think we've always been at least a little fascist, right? And so at all the levels. So the consolidation of power across all of the branches of government in a way that is in line with the revocation of rights from the people is the worst we've seen, I believe, in my life. And I think America has never fully been a democracy for Black people. Like, I think we've never done much better than, like, the 3/5 rule. Like, I don't think we have ever fully become a multiracial democracy. I think I have recently become obsessed with the Star Spangled Banner. You may have guessed from my previous remarks that wasn't, like, on my last year's Spotify Wrapped. And it's because the song, like, if you're familiar with it, I assume, they're watching they're watching this battle. They're looking to see if their flag's still on the boat. Morning comes, like, they can't, like, get an update on IG, so they have to wait for morning. And morning comes, and the question is, like, does the flag still wave over the land of the free and the home of the brave? And there's two things I love about the song. One is, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night, but the flag was still there. Like, that part, the only evidence that this like, nascent maybe democracy is still there is the sound of fighting. It's the sound of battle. So it means, like, the second the fight goes quiet, it means we've lost, right? And I feel that very much in this moment. Like, the only thing that makes me think we are going to become a democracy is what I see people doing. It's what I see my neighbors doing. It's what I see the people of Minneapolis doing. Like, that's our rocket's red glare of the moment. Like, that is, like, it is the fighting that is proof that something is still not fully lost. And then the thing that makes me, like, obsessed with the song is it ends in a question mark. And I don't know if there's another national anthem that ends in a question mark. Like, this nation's only ever been a question. It's as yet unanswered. Like, there's this open question of, like, do we or don't we want to be a multiracial democracy? And we go back and forth on it at best, right? Like, we've never firmly landed in yes. And, like, I think we may be alive to see the answer in our lifetime. That's a cool time to be alive. Super interesting. People for hundreds of years have wanted to see the answer. And I think we get to shape the answer. And I think we get to become, if we do it really truly together, we get to become the nation that's always been kind of an open question, and that isn't even a little bit fascist for the first time ever.
Here's the question, Mike.
I have different versions of it. I can kind of,
Hi, thank you all for your time, for being here today. I wanted to address the comment that you made, Director Straight. You said that politics is downstream of culture. This is an idea that we're exploring in our classes right now, and I think it's very true that politics is really what happens in the streets with the people, and policy laws are just a manifestation of that. What I find really concerning and scary about this time, however, is that that feedback loop seems to be broken. With abortion, with immigration, with what's happening in Minnesota, this isn't something that's popular, not just with Democrats, but even with Republicans, and yet the government isn't responding to that.
Yeah.
And so I wonder, just like, what are your thoughts on that, and how should we react to that when we feel like we're not being heard?
Yeah. It's so funny, on our, we got to take a car over this morning, and I was saying this, that some of the most important work I've been able to do since Dobbs, where we sent collective messages that showed where we were the ballot measures that we've had in states that were so clear, and we were set up to fail in many of them. The first one being in Kansas, where they put something on the ballot on a primary where they didn't think there was, where they thought only a Republican was going to be at the top of the ticket, and we still were able to overcome, because you're right, like, it is an incredible moment, and we were talking about it in the terms of exactly what Danielle has been saying, that the other side has been able to organize very, very strongly at the very hyper-local level in a way that has been incredibly influential, and so some folks who hold an extremely minority opinion are able to exercise a lot of power that, you know, isn't held by the majority. And I think that a lot of that has to do with the fact that we have not invested in organizing in the same way that they have. Our systems of news delivery have been completely broken, and in some of those spaces, we just have been absent from them altogether. I think some of that is the mistake of us being in institutions where we want to use other institutions to get that message out, and we maybe feel uncomfortable. I'm exploring this all the time, because we know that right now on most social channels, young people are advocating for their oppression when it comes to abortion or birth control, or how they show up, not advocating for their, ultimately for them to have bodily autonomy. That is something that is not their fault. It's my fault. I need to be looking at, like, why is that? I also think that we are in a moment where a lot of folks, particularly the generations, I was born in 1973. I am the Roe generation. All we've seen is that moment go backwards. And some folks have only seen that in their young lifetime. So how are we talking back to that? Because it does get us to a point where it feels very, very defeating that there can be something different. But I know there can. And when we did those ballots, I cannot tell you the spontaneous organizing that happened when folks knew what the stakes were, but more importantly, what they were going to win, was incredible. I'm going to go back to Kansas, and then I know we have more questions. In Kansas, we were doing all of these conversations around this. And Kansas is, I'm from Colorado, it's our neighbor state, but, it's a wild place. We're wild in the West a little bit. And but people deeply believed, in a completely nonpartisan way, that they should not be having the government tell them what to do with their healthcare, period. And my favorite thing that happened is this group of people came together, and we were doing spectrum type of training, like, who do you talk to normally? Who's in your everyday life? And these women came forward, and they're like, well, we're horse people. And they were horse people through and through. They worked in a barn, they raised horses, one of them did dressage, one of them did racing, one of them just liked horses. So, like, it wasn't, with it, but they identified that way. And they started an organization called Vote Nay, Neigh, on their own. And they went barn to barn and organized people. I have their t-shirt, I wear it to bed, Vote Nay. Because they were like, we're horse people, but this is important to us. And so it's moments like that that I think fundamentally, when I think of, when we have the mythology about the civil rights movement and the sanitized versions of it, it really is the folks who sat at the lunch counter week after week for 2 years. Yeah. It wasn't the win. Yeah. The win was incredible, and thank God for the win. Yeah. But people sat at the lunch counter every week for 2 years. That's what it is.
Hello, thank you all for being here. I guess a lot of the comments about sort of like trying to do what you can and getting in touch with relatives or what have you struck me. I guess I married into a family earlier this year. Love many of them.
Congrats.
Thank you. Yeah, but the plus and other sides of marriage is that you have those relatives, right? And like, I am just thinking about like the opportunity costs of saying something because. Frankly, I don't think, like, there's an SNL sketch this weekend where a mother came out to her adult children as being, like, I don't know if y'all have seen it, but about being, like, finally reached and changing her political opinions because she was, quote, on an old computer that got different internet. And that really resonated with me. And especially for a lot of these folks, like, it's very religion coded, a lot of their beliefs, and it's almost merged. So not just with respect to sort of reproductive questions, but also now, like, questions of power and wielding that and sort of like, you know, Jesus as John Wayne. And so it's like, I guess, what would you counsel to folks in my position on the periphery? Because I have to balance the like navigating a relationship and respecting, you know, the spouse's preference about their relatives, but also like this urgent call to like do or be killed action. And it's like, how do I juggle that?
Yeah. I'll say a couple things. So one, believe it or not, there has been conversation. We do a lot of organizing conversations, right? I'm an organizer at the end of the day, and it's organizing is about relationship building and listening, and really understanding people's values and what they really care about, and then making the connection back to whatever action it is that you want them to take, or just sharing different perspectives. And so one, I think it starts with just like listening and understanding where their values and what they really care about, whether it's horses or you know, something else, or religion, right? And then the other thing, though, too, I think is important in organizing is not to be like self-righteous or judgmental. In fact, there's some studies on like how do you get people out of cults, because honestly, there are some like cult-like behaviors in terms of defending like things that normally I think people wouldn't defend, like being a pedophile, etc. And so, and what we learned from the studying of how do people leave cults, it almost always is because someone was kind to them and they helped them, and then they built that trust, and then they were able to hear different perspectives and start questioning their core beliefs a little bit, and then we're able to move. And so I would just say, like, you know, call people in and like don't go in too hot, but starting with that kindness and relationship building and trust, then people will be able to hear you better. That's just my own like kind of experience anyway, and some things we've learned as organizers.
Yeah, I think I echo all of that. I mean, I think you get in the closest, most honest, most loving relationship you can with a person, and you try and love them for the whole of who they are, which includes all sorts of other things. You can be as honest as possible about where you disagree with, while holding the love at the same time, right? Like, I have family members where we have deeply loving relationships and deeply different views about the world. And like, you let them love you, and try and let them love you as a person who believes what you believe. And that's good too, like that's a step, right? And I think, I mean, love, it sounds very corny, where I'm like, just go to love. But love is some serious shit. Like love is there's very little people won't do for it. You know, like, and it's it can get out of the bounds of law, out of the bounds of policy, out of the bounds of partisanship, if you can really like care about a person. So I think that's like one thing is like, you know, love each other. And then I think questions are almost always better than statements. Like Common Justice for around issues of policing, we developed an inquiry-based curriculum. It's primarily designed for people working in Black and Brown communities. But instead of, where there's still a bunch of youths that are supportive of draconian policing, and instead of telling anyone anything, we just ask smart questions. We spend a year coming up with the best questions we can ask. And those questions aren't supposed to be like gotcha questions. And then being like, do you like being stupid? You know, like that's not what we're asking, right? Like you're asking questions that are like complicated and close to the heart and like really seeking to understand, and then those things help people make different meaning of their own experience in ways. Being told things, almost none of us change by being told, and we've been telling you all these things, maybe, who knows. We change by being asked things, right? Like we change in relationship, and so, I don't know, I'm like, love them a long time, and you don't have to get them out in the streets like right now. Like, if you're out in the streets and if we win a little bit, then we're gonna have years and years to fight, and so, I also think like, I think the people in Minneapolis are showing us the way. I think that is how we beat fascism. I think we haven't done what's needed to beat fascism until now, and I think we're starting to do it, and it is gorgeous. And to your point, it's everyone. It's the horse people. It's like the sex shop that turned into a food redistribution center, and the pizza shop that for every pizza someone ordered, they delivered a pizza to someone who couldn't go out of their house, and people delivering groceries and all of that. Like it's everything. It's not just recording ice. Like it's the thing like where Ruthie Wilson Gilmore teaches abolition as presence, not the absence of things. It's like being there. And so I'm like, I think you go there and I think of like them singing outside, like the thing they're singing under where like ice is murdering people in front of them, and they're singing like, it's not too late to change your mind, show us your courage, leave all this behind. You're welcome with us anytime. Like that's the song these like insurrectionists are singing, you know, and I think as much as possible, like, I don't know, you love people and you keep the door open and you try, you know, hopefully I don't get you in trouble with your wife.
I'm going to add something way less high-minded, and that is have a relationship with your wife be the primary thing that you're protecting, and use each other however you can to get through those moments. And if you can't convince people, listening to them along the way. But I have an Uncle Scott who I'm never going to convince. God bless him, which is what I say to him, and he says it back, and I appreciate his blessings. And then every time I meet with him, I come home, I vent, and I say, I got to go organize 5 people.
Yeah.
Because
100%.
The good news about my Uncle Scott is he's on the couch. So if I organize 5 people, he's not going to change. He's 70 years old. I love him for what we have in common, which is my mother. But so also that, like, you may just have to suffer through some of the family stuff and find that commonality that isn't that, so that you can, you know, maybe they're great cooks, you know, something that, but then also go organize 5 every time. I'm like, this one's for you, Uncle Scott. My grandma used to also, I was organizing for Planned Parenthood. She was organizing for the Conservative Union, Conservative Women's Union. We were on opposite sides. She'd be like, I'm praying for you. I'm like, great. That's going to get me to go get 5 more people, Grandma. So there's other things, too, that just protect your own peace and your love, too.
For me, that's Melania is a different story. Don't say yourself, so.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can I just say that too? That just like, we got to pick the battles. Too.
Yeah.
Like think about the spectrum, right? And like which ones of them might move from neutral to passive ally. Yeah. But if you got someone who's like, you just don't spend your time.
Yeah, you don't spend your time, but you also don't throw them away.
But this moment is bringing different things to bear.
Yeah.
So when you listen and build that relationship, you'll see an opening sometimes that you didn't know. I saw one with my Uncle Scott in one moment. It didn't go, it was temporary, but still, like, this moment is different. And so there's also just different openings when you do that listening.
Yeah. Thank you, JJ. Thank you for that question. So unfortunately, we're almost at the end of the hour. I know there are other students that might have some questions for you at the end. But I wanted to say on behalf of the Rappaport Center, Professor McCoy, Alexis, and myself, we are deeply appreciative of the 3 of you being here, sharing wisdom not only about your work, but also about how to get along better with our family, whether they're millennial watching or not. There's deep, deep wisdom here on this panel. So JJ, Danielle, and Jessica, we're really, really grateful. And for the students who are here, I think the one thing I would leave you with is that, you know, often when we come to law school, we believe that the law is a discipline. And when you hear that word discipline, it means you're working within something, that you're being constrained by something. But the way that I'm hoping, or the Rappaport Center is hoping that you engage with the law, is that it is a profession. It is a calling. So the question is, what are you going to profess? What are you called to do? You don't have to be called to do exactly what these individuals are being called to do, but I really hope that this panel encourages to feel like you are called to something, whatever that is, and that you have a really relationship-driven and positive and loving time doing that.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for being here, and thank you to everybody on Zoom. We appreciate you too.
Thank you.